and welcome back to the channel. This is the Darklight Emissary, and today's video is going to cover another hero of the Horus Heresy series, Saul Tarvitz, captain of the Emperor's Children, 10th Company. Just like Garviel, who we covered in the last video, Saul is vital to the Loyalists knowing about the heresy when they did, as well as just him being one of the most honorable characters in the early Horus Heresy, like Garviel, and like his friend Nathaniel and Garviel. These three captains are essentially what I would call almost a trinity of, some of the most important characters that we have, the main POV from in the first 5 books of the Horus Heresy, essentially. And through Saul's actions especially is how Nathaniel and Garviel is able to flee and eventually run into Rogal Dorn, Primarch of the Imperial Fists, and warn them of the coming Horus Heresy, with the betrayal of Horus's Legion and the other traitors that threw in with him. For a quick second here, before we dive in, as always, I appreciate your time here. If you're new, welcome. If you're not so new, thank you so much for your time and attention here. And I would appreciate a subscribe or a like or comment if you feel that I have earned that as you listen to this. And also, if you are interested in other things, we have quite a few videos on this channel already that you can go take a look at. I love interacting with you guys and talking about the lore like this. And so, anyway, I just appreciate all of you here. So, without further ado, let's jump into this topic here. So, Saul is a character that, out of the 3 ones I mentioned, out of Garviel and Nathaniel, we know least about, out of the 3. I couldn't find, and I don't remember reading anything about Saul's background. We don't know what world he's recruited from, whether it was the Emperor's Children homeworld of Chemos, or whether it was Terra. But he had to have been a veteran of some length of time, because by the time we get to know him, he's already a captain of the Emperor's Children, and he seems to be a very successful one at that. We don't get to meet too many members of his company over the time we get to know him, but by reputation he seems to be well respected by his men in his company, and he seems to be respected by captains of other legions, to the point where he even becomes like on-around brothers with Nathaniel and Garviel, who is a captain in the Death Guard Legion, and an important character in the Horus Heresy as well. Saul was in many ways what the Emperor's Children Legion should have always been. He was a stalwart and confident leader, but he never really treaded into the realm of arrogance or hawkishness or haughtiness that some of the Emperor's Children were known for by the other legions. Several, if not many, of the other legions viewed the Emperor's Children as kind of like peacocks and dandies. These guys, these legionnaires who liked to preen about how pretty their armor was and liked the arts and other things other than just warfare. And it could be said that Saul basically exemplified the best parts of those attributes of the Legion. He was seen as someone who was very confident, but not like unhumble, or not, he was very humble for who he was in the Legion, and he didn't really have a ton of ambition like some of the other leaders within the Legion did to climb the ranks and become as close to the Primarch as they could be in terms of rank and status. And this brought him into conflict with one of the Lord Commanders of the Emperor's Children, Eidolon. And Eidolon is basically the exact opposite of Saul in many ways. Eidolon is all of the worst aggrandized attributes of the Emperor's Children. He was very arrogant. He was too sure of himself all the time. He would commit to plans of action based upon his ego and not out of any strategic merit or tactical merit. He once told Saul, while they were walking down one of the hallways of the Emperor's Children flagship, the Gloriana battleship they were on, that he would never amount to anything, that he would always just be a line officer, and that there was no hope for him to climb the ranks, to get anywhere close to Eidolon's position. And while Saul didn't really care much about Eidolon's opinion of himself, he did notice that this was just a large amount of arrogance coming from one of the top leaders in the Legion, and this kind of helped foment some of the concern that Saul ended up using to discern the issues that were starting to riddle this legion and eventually lead to its downfall and corruption by Slaanesh, chaos god of excess, pleasure, pain, all of the above. And this finally rose to a level that Saul couldn't ignore when the Emperor's children were called to the Isstvan system to bring about the recompliance of a world in rebellion on a world known as Isstvan III in the system. And so Saul became suspicious that something was going on when, first of all, one of the Lord Commanders of the Legion disappeared, Vespasian, who was seemingly the better of the Lord Commanders, and then that leaves Eidolon still around. And Eidolon is very arrogant, as mentioned before, and ego-driven, meaning that he likes to be at the forefront of any battle to gain as much glory for himself as possible. And so it was very noticeable when Saul noticed that Eidolon was not going down to Isstvan III and didn't seem to have any plans to. And then Saul realized that the ships that they were on, all of the ships, were being loaded up with virus bombs, which was also unusual considering that a large portion of the legions, the 4 legions in orbit, were all down on the planet below. Estimated forces down on the world range in about the 20,000 legionary range, so not an insignificant force. That's the equivalent of a full 20 chapters of Space Marines in current 40k times down on this world. And so Saul knew that something really bad was afoot here and decided to do something about that. Saul was set to go down to Isstvan III with a portion of his legion and captains that were fellow Loyalists, but since he knew something was up, he decided to approach the ancient Rylanor, who is a dreadnought in the Legion, and probably one of the higher ranking members because of that, just due to the sheer age of him, as well as probably being one of the first members of the Legion still around. Rylanor, being that old, is also one of the Loyalists as well, and they basically speak, and Saul basically offers to stay aboard the ship, and Rylanor agrees to take his place in the assault on Isstvan III. Saul then uses this time to basically check the ship, and that's when he notices the virus bombs being loaded and realizes something really bad is probably about to happen. And so he commandeers a Thunderhawk in an attempt to make it to the planet's surface to warn the Loyalists as quick as possible of their impending fates. His ship is being chased by several fighters that were deployed by Eidolon when Eidolon noticed that he was trying to make it to the surface, and that is when Saul is contacted by Nathaniel Garviel, commander of the Eisenstein, and also a captain of the Death Guard Legion, who also happened to be a Loyalist and was close friends with Saul, and that was a very lucky break for Saul to be able to convince Nathaniel to let him pass. And they have a dialogue back and forth, and Saul basically tells Nathaniel that they are betrayed, that all of the men on the surface are going to be killed by their own legions, by their own brothers, by their own primarchs, and that, he needs to get down there and warn them. And so Nathaniel makes the deliberation pretty quickly to aid Saul, and he destroys the fighters chasing Saul down to the surface, and basically tells, Saul good luck with his mission, and then Nathaniel starts to evacuate on the Eisenstein to get out into a warp point to warn the rest of the Imperium of the coming civil war. And in the next video, we will be talking about Nathaniel's story to complete these 3 members of these 3 legions who helped assist the Loyalists in being somewhat prepared for the coming war and attempt to topple the Emperor and his plans. And so Saul is able to make it down to the surface of Isstvan III, and by the time he gets down there, the battle for recompliance is basically completed, and Saul first makes contact with some Loyalist world eaters. What I found really funny about this interaction at first is Saul approaches the commander of the world eaters here, and Saul takes note that several of the world eaters seem to be painted in red, despite the fact that they are of a white and blue color scheme. It just shows how in the thick of fighting they were against forces here. And Saul knows that to broach the subject of them being betrayed, he needs to be somewhat careful, especially with the world leaders who are kind of famously known for being volatile in the best of days. Although that being said, the world leaders were no stranger to Angron hating most of them to a great degree, and I'm sure that these particular world leaders had to know that something was up just because they were the ones pointed out to be somewhat more loyal to the Emperor than the rest of them. And so Saul basically tacitly says that, they're going to be bombed by virus bombs soon, and the leader of the world leaders basically says, we have been betrayed, and Saul acknowledges it, and the world leader commander just simply asks why. And Saul doesn't really have a great answer for him on this, but he basically essentially says that they have a short amount of time to make it to a bunker system before the virus bombs release in the air and destroy the entire world, essentially, at least as far as biological life is concerned. And so this warning comes about nearly too late, and the world leaders are making their way into the bunker systems just as the bombs are going off in the air, and it's such a close call that several of the bunkers don't seal enough fast enough, and some of the world leaders are consumed by the virus, and several others fall to their knees and start screaming as they're making their way towards the bunkers as the virus starts to spread rapidly across any living being on the planet. Saul and a decent amount of the world leaders do make it to the bunkers, though, and seal themselves inside, along with the rest of the Loyalists, now with knowledge that they've been betrayed, doing the same throughout the remains of the city. Shortly after the Life Eater virus destroys the entire biosphere of the planet, Horus then orders lance strikes down onto the world, which sets it aflame from all the decayed matter now, and the world basically is scorched into a cindered husk at that point. And then the Loyalists reemerge from their hiding places, and shortly after this happens, the world leaders that are with Saul witness some world leader ships coming down out of the sky, several Thunderhawks and Stormbirds, and one of them opens up, and the world leaders start firing at the inside of it. They know that nothing friendly is coming down, and what is inside happens to be their Primarch himself, Angron. And Angron comes out in a flying rage and just starts hacking into his former sons. Saul is suitably horrified by this, to witness this firsthand, and the captain of the world leaders with him basically tells him to go to the rest of the Loyalists and help fight against the rest of the traitors, and basically tells him that this isn't his fight to have with their Primarch. And I don't think Saul had much of an argument against such an action, and so Saul makes his leave deeper into the remains of the city to link up with Garviel and Tarek Torgadon and the rest of the Loyalist commanders that survived along with their men. Because of Saul Tarvitz's quick thinking and discernment, he was able to help the Loyalists hold out for the next 3 months on this world, which greatly delayed Horus's plans for trying to consolidate and get ready for an actual war with the Loyalists of the Imperium, and to go attack his father, the Emperor. This also gave his friend Nathaniel time to reach anyone, and tell them about what was on their way towards them. And by all accounts, Saul was a great commander during this time period, along with Garviel and the rest of them. He often led assaults and sorties out against the traitors during the nighttime. He would go up against his former brothers and the Emperor's children, and through his just great strategic thinking, was often able to come out on top in these battles. And over time, he was able to really put a black eye on Lord Commander Eidolon, who was commanding a lot of the traitor forces against him. Saul, not one to be stupid though, or full of himself, knew that their resistance could only last so long, and that eventually cracks would start to form, and they would eventually fall. He just knew that they could give them as much of a, black eye as they could before the inevitable end. But the end did come, and it came from one of his former friends, Lucius, who was another captain that had been sent down on the assumption that he was a loyalist. Lucius was more of an opportunist, however. Lucius had no plans to die for loyalty or for honor to the emperor or anyone other than himself, and so he struck a deal with Eidolon to betray the forces loyal to the emperor on this world and open up a assault vector for Eidolon's forces to finally assist in breaking open the defenders' defensive lines and bring this conflict to an end. And so with both Loken and Tarek Torgadon presumed dead at the hands of Abaddon and Little Horse Axmund of the Sons of Horus Legion, and other commanders falling apart, being destroyed, being killed, the Loyalist Death Guard were being overrun by enemy titans, like the Dies Irae, and Traitor Death Guard were deployed en masse to take them down and then move into the city, along with other elements of Traitor forces and titans. And so against the full might arrayed from these legions, despite Saul's great tactical and strategic mind, he was simply overcome by overwhelming odds and numbers against him and his men. And so one of the final moments we get with Saul is him leaning up against a wall, along with several of the Luna Wolves that are left with him from Loken's command, and other members of the Loyalists that are basically the last ones left alive in the ruins of the palace of the city. And one of the Luna Wolves turns to Saul and basically asks him, Captain, did we hurt them? Was this worth it? And Saul contemplates this for a minute and basically just returns the thought that yes, he believes that they did achieve something here, and that, it would ring out into the far future what their actions did here. Even if they are forgotten, what they do here will not be forgotten in terms of the consequences of their actions, which ended up being the case since this allowed the Loyalists to organize a bit quicker than they would have. And, it could have possibly ended up with more of a surprise attack against Loyalist positions than it already was to an extent to begin with. And so we are not witness to Saul's final moments. The world is bombarded once more by a whole lot of orbital fire from the orbiting ships of the traitor fleets, and the city is basically pounded into just complete rubble after all the traitor forces have retreated, after slaying as many of the Loyalists as they could find in the ruins of this city. And the only men to make it out with any version of legacy of Saul Tarvitz would be Garviel Loken, who was the single survivor of Isstvan III, as well as Nathaniel Garviel. But over time, both of those men would also succumb to the great terror of the Horus Heresy War, and with their passing would come the complete forgetting of Saul Tarvitz, who was one of the first and greatest heroes, in a sense, of the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy era. And it could be said that Saul Tarvitz was essentially one of the very last loyal, true children of the Emperor for his actions. And also the last gasp of true honor and loyalty and pursuit of perfection that the Emperor's children once represented guttered out and died along with Saul and the remainders of his Loyalist Legion here on the ashes of this world that their traitor brothers gleefully threw down and burned along with their former brothers, with really the exception to that being ancient Rylanor, who ends up surviving Isstvan III, but that's a story for another time. And that's where Saul's story ends. His end is kind of premature and kind of in a sad way. It kind of speaks to the tragedy of, a career and, mind cut short, which plenty of that happened during the Horus Heresy. His friends, his colleagues, Garviel and Nathaniel, were able to carry the torch much farther than any of us ever thought when we first started reading these books. But Saul was definitely a favorite at the beginning, and it was kind of sad to see that he did not survive to continue to carry that torch along with his brethren. One could hope that when Nathaniel Garrow gave his report to Rogal Dorn, that he mentioned Saul, and that Saul's name is recorded in honor somewhere in some lost forgotten lore buried on Terra somewhere. Perhaps his name actually is carved into a wall in the Imperial Palace and is there amongst many other fallen heroes of the Imperium, but chances are his name and his legacy was lost to time, much like Garviel and much like Nathaniel were, ultimately, like so many other things lost and forgotten by the Imperium over its many millennia since that era. So that is the story and legacy of Saul Tarvitz. And so if you've liked this video, please consider leaving a subscribe if you have not already done that. If you have, I thank you. If you haven't, I appreciate your time here regardless. And if you want to leave a comment talking about this topic, or requesting a new topic, or bringing up really anything in the lore, I always love to talk with you in the comments, and I appreciate your support and enthusiasm for this universe that we all love to talk about here. And so as always, I hope you have a great day or night wherever you are, and I will see you in the next video. Thanks again for your time. Talk with you soon.